Hi everyone, welcome to the latest panel for the YA ThrillerCon. This one is all about writing YA crime fiction versus writing adult crime fiction. And yeah, this is a live broadcast to YouTube, so if you're watching live, you can use the live chat Q&A facility, which will be next to the video stream on YouTube, so then you can ask us any questions that you have during this panel. So it's a really good opportunity for you to ask any questions and get answers straight away. We've got a lot of panels, interviews and readings from authors for YA ThrillerCon happening today and tomorrow, and you can see the schedule at www.yathrillercon.co.uk. All of the broadcasts are done live, but they do remain up on YouTube, so you can watch them at any later time. So yeah, Kit, would you like to take over now as you're moderating this panel?
Great, thanks so much, Madeline. It's really great to be here. So welcome everybody to this panel, which is on writing YA crime and thrillers versus writing adult crime and thrillers. And yeah, welcome to Madeline Dyer, Tori Eldridge, C.L. Taylor, and Caleb Roehrig. Did I pronounce that right, Caleb?
It's Roehrig, but you're close enough.
Close enough, excellent, cool. So I'm Kit Mallory. I'm a YA dystopian author. I'm the author of a duology, which is edging a little bit too close to non-fiction these days. My latest novel, Sparks, just came out last week. In my non-author life, I'm also a practicing mental health professional with an interest in trauma. I spent a lot of my career working with teenagers and also worked in a prison. So my non-author life strangely aligns quite a lot with the topics of this panel today. So I'm going to come to each of the panel now and ask you to introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about your latest books. So Madeline, can we come to you first?
Yeah, hi. So yeah, I'm Madeline. I write YA dystopians and YA thrillers. My latest book is called This Vicious Way, and it released in February this year. So I've actually got a copy of it here. And this is a YA thriller, but it's just set in a dystopian world, and it's actually the same dystopian world that my other series is set in. It's a bit of a weird one about why I chose to sort of combine my dystopian series with my thriller writing, and it actually came about because a couple of years ago I had brain inflammation, and before I had the brain inflammation I was solely writing dystopian and fantasy, and then after I recovered from that I found I was just really drawn to thrillers. But I also had this dystopian series that wasn't yet finished. So I had to write another dystopian novel. But as I was so drawn to thrillers, it turned out that I ended up writing a thriller set in this dystopian world. So yeah, that's me and my latest book.
Amazing. That's the best of both worlds. Or the worst of both worlds, depending on your point of view. Tori, tell us a little bit about your work.
Okay, I'm here in Los Angeles, California, so it's really fun to be talking to y'all. I'm the author of The Ninja Daughter and the upcoming The Ninja's Blade. And my series is about a Chinese-Norwegian modern-day ninja in Los Angeles with Joy Luck Club family issues. In The Ninja Daughter, she battles the LA Ukrainian mob, LA Metro politicians, sex traffickers, and a really interesting assassin within a disturbing obsession for her. And in Ninja's Blade, she does a deep dive into the gritty world of youth sex trafficking while she's hunting down a high school teenager. At the same time, her meddlesome and adorable grandparents are coming in from Hong Kong to create trouble. So it's an action thriller, and yet it has these fun, family cultural elements about it.
That's really important, isn't it, when you write it? It sounds like it's kind of really dark material, but also it's really lovely to have those kind of lighter, sort of humorous moments balancing it. It sounds like a really fun read. Yeah, cool. Thank you, Tori. Callie, can we come to you next?
Hi, sorry I disappeared briefly. As I said to the panel earlier, and for anybody watching, my son's playing Minecraft downstairs. So if I vanish again, you can blame him. So I'm Callie Taylor and I write crime as C.L. Taylor. I'm primarily an adult crime author. I write psychological thrillers, including Strangers, which came out this year, and Sleep, which came out last year and was a Richard and Judy club pick. But I also write young adult, for the love of it. And my last one was The Treatment, which it was a sort of near future thriller about a girl whose brother disappears, and she discovers that he's been taken to this correctional academy where it turns out the government is brainwashing students who are expelled from school into becoming model citizens. So she sets out to rescue him. Whereas my next one, The Island, which is out January next year, is more of a straight thriller, in that there's no kind of sort of alternate date sort of thing. It's about 6 teenage friends who go on holiday with their parents to Thailand, and one of them is really like a massive prepper. He's really into
we've just
Minecraft got her.
survivalist stuff. So for his and the guy dies, and then they're left alone on the island, and all their worst fears start to come true, all their phobias come true, and it's about who makes it off the island alive.
That does sound genuinely horrifying. Sounds really scary. Thank you, Kelly. Caleb, tell us about yourself and your work.
Hi. So I am the author. I've written a few straightforward sort of mystery suspense titles. My last novel was Death Prefers Blondes, which is an action-adventure retelling of Hamlet about a rebel heiress and 4 kickboxing drag queens. And my next book, which comes out on Tuesday, is The Fell of Dark, which is a paranormal thriller about a teenage boy who finds himself caught between warring vampire cults when he is named a key figure in an apocalyptic prophecy. He does not know if he is destined to save the world or destroy it entirely, but either way, he's not getting out of doing his history homework, and he's pissed.
That sounds amazing.
Hilarious.
I think my to read list just got substantially bigger listening to all of those summaries. That sounds amazing. Thank you, Caleb. So it's really great to have such a kind of mix of experience, some YA, some adult writing, and I know that some of you have written in other genres as well. So for the first question, if it's okay, I will kind of come to each of you in turn to tell me, how did you get started writing thrillers and crime fiction? So Tori, could you tell us a little bit about how you started out?
Sure. I actually started out as an actor, singer, dancer on Broadway, television, and film, and a wild career path, and then got into screenwriting. And one of those, everybody kept a particular screenplay that like, you should be writing novels. And so I turned into a novel, but it was a long time ago, and I laid it to rest for about 13 years to pursue my obsession with martial arts. I actually hold a 5th degree black belt in Toshindo Ninjutsu. So like my protagonist, Lily Wong, I am a modern day ninja, which makes this panel the most safe panel in all virtual land.
It's very reassuring.
Yeah. So anyway, all of that, raising a couple sons. Just about 6 months before my 50th birthday, I decided that I was going to career shift and really focus on writing. And at that moment, I was rewriting that other book. Well, one of the first organizations that I became connected to was the International Thriller Writers organization. And from there were most of my friends, my mentors. And so that was a very close connection. But what I realized was, coming from an entertainment background and writing screenplays, I write fast-paced. I like excitement. As a 5th degree black belt, you can imagine I like action. I like complex mysteries, and so it just happened that that's what came out of me. It's like The Ninja Daughter is the first book published. It wasn't the first book written, but it's the book that's closest to me personally. And it wasn't until after it got a deal with Polis Books, their new imprint, Agora, which is a diversity-focused crime fiction imprint, that I realized, I wrote crime fiction. So there you go.
Amazing. And what an amazing way to kind of bring those two parts of your life together. I imagine it's probably the most technically accurate in terms of kind of martial arts or detail and description that you could find. So,
I'm big on authenticity, so yeah. I wanted to bust through the whole ninja stereotype thing and really kind of share some real stuff. So it was fun.
Yeah. That's really cool. Well, thank you, Tori. Callie, tell us about you. How did you get started writing thrillers?
I'm going to put it out there that I'm a kickboxer. No, well,
I love kickboxing. Did that for years, man. Right, let's do it.
It kind of ties in with my story actually, because I'm nowhere near the ninja that you are, Tori. I only did the first 2 belts. So I got a red belt and yellow belt. And then I was about to grade for my orange belt when I found out I was pregnant. And actually being pregnant turned me to crime. So we've got Madeline's having a brain issue who turns you to crime. And being pregnant turns you to crime, because
I think you've just frozen up a little bit there, Callie. So
am I still frozen?
This is
Minecraft.
Minecraft. This is why.
I can hear you all. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Yes,
I can hear you now.
Can hear you now. Yes, brilliant. Yeah, sorry, Callie, could you just run us through that again, starting from the bit where the pregnancy kind of brought you into the world of crime? Tell us what happened from there.
Sorry, I was so sorry about this, like breaking off. I've done a few Zoom things and it's all been fine, but who knows? Anyway, shout if I disappear again, and I'll probably go on into a different room. So I was pregnant, and I had got a deal with Orion for 2 romantic comedies, and shortly before my second book was about to come out, I entered a competition run by the Romantic Novelists Association here in the UK. And the competition was to write a chapter on the theme of keeping a secret. And I was heavily pregnant, and I was in a supermarket, and I was in a queue, and I had that kind of like 1,000-yard stare that you can get, where you just kind of zone out when you're a pregnant woman and life's a bit stressful. And then a character told me the first couple of lines of a story. It's like literally the only time it's ever happened in my life where I just sort of heard a character's voice. So she told me the first few lines of the story, and I was like, oh my God, I love that. It was about being at her daughter's bedside in a hospital. The daughter's in a coma because she deliberately stepped in front of a bus. And then she goes through her daughter's room and finds a diary that says, keeping this secret is killing me. So I had this first chapter where the mum was saying, if it's this, blink, if it's that, squeeze my hand. And I wrote it, and I had no idea what else happened. So I entered it into the competition, and it won. And the prize giver said to me, oh, we loved this, the panel loved this. What happens next? And I said, I've got no idea. It's just a chapter. And I thought nothing more would come of it. And then my second rom-com came out 6 weeks after I'd had my son. And my agent said to me, right, can you put together a synopsis and 3 chapters so we can try and get you a second 2-book deal? My editor didn't want anything. That year, she culled at least 3 or 4 romantic comedy authors, including me. So I found myself without a deal. I didn't know what to do. And then I just kept thinking about this story that I'd written, and how the chair lady of the RNA had said, you must write it. And I knew it wasn't romantic suspense. It was a lot darker than that. It was a psychological thriller. So while my son slept, when he did sleep, I wrote this book. I wrote the rest of it, and my agent read it and said, it's the best thing you've written, and went on to get me a 2-book deal. And since then I'm now on book number 8 of crime, plus 2 young adult books. So that editor and I'm much more successful now than I was as a rom-com writer. So that editor actually did me a massive favor, I think.
Amazing. You couldn't get more different, could you, from romantic comedies to to psychological thrillers. That's amazing. So Abby's just joined us. Hi, Abby. Welcome.
Hi. I got my time all wrong. So I looked up. So my apologies first. I looked up my time and it said for 6 p.m. UK time it would be 11 o'clock here. So I'm thinking I have to stay up tonight. I've told everybody I'm going to be on at 11 o'clock.
Oh no!
I apologize. It's me and Google. I'll have to have a talk with them.
Oh, no.
Well, it's great to have you here. I will give you a minute to gather yourself. I'm going to go to a couple of other panel members, and then I'll come back and ask you to introduce yourself, if that's okay. It's great to have you. Caleb, tell us about you. How did you get started writing thrillers?
So actually, this is funny. Much like Tori, I actually started as an actor, and I have a black belt in Taekwondo. But I always enjoyed writing. I took a short story writing class in high school, and I really had a lot of fun with it. And after high school, I actually had a friend in college, and I missed writing, and I would have her give me like assignments, and I would write little stories for her. Like once a week, she would give me a story prompt, and I would come up with something. And I remember one day she asked me to write like a short horror story, so I did. And after she read it, I said to her, I was like, I feel like there's more to this. Like I want to keep writing this I want to embellish on this story. And I kept writing and I kept writing and I kept writing. And eventually I was like, I'm writing a book. I had never done it before. I had no idea what I was doing. I wrote, but by the time I finished, it was like 160,000 words long. It was massive. I made so many mistakes, and to me, it was all perfect. But it started an obsession. So after that, I was convinced that one day I was going to be a published writer. I just had to keep trying, and I did. So I kind of wrote on and off for years and years, and it wasn't until actually in 2009 when the economy crashed, I lost my job, and then my husband and I moved to Finland, where he was doing a postdoctoral research grant through the University of Helsinki. I did not have a work permit, so I ended up doing I had nothing to do all day except for write, and that is how I ended up writing my debut thriller, which was Last Seen Leaving, which was published in 2016. So that's how I got started.
Amazing. I think we've all had that experience, as newbie writers, kind of writing that 150,000 word novel that we all think is an excellent idea at the time. Thank you, Caleb. Madeline, you've kind of touched on this a little bit about sort of how you got started in sort of how you moved from kind of dystopian into crime and thrillers. Can you tell us anything more about that, about what sort of led you down that path, how you found it?
Yeah, well, it was actually a complete surprise for me because, I started writing when I was 17, so I started writing seriously, got my first book deal when I was 19, and I was writing completely just sticking to sort of like dystopian and fantasy at that point. And then when I was 23, I developed brain inflammation, like literally overnight, and I woke up the next day and I couldn't balance and I was just falling over. And as that progressed on with like the months, I suddenly like lost the ability to speak. I couldn't communicate. Like my handwriting went completely. I couldn't hold a pen, and I found it like this really lonely time because like I couldn't tell anyone how I was feeling because I could not communicate. And then I was like untreated for 6 months because doctors just didn't know what was wrong with me. And when I eventually started getting treatment and I started like beginning to feel better and I started writing again, I just started writing a thriller, and it was completely unexpected to me, and I didn't really know what I was writing or why I was suddenly moved to this whole new genre. But it really spoke to me, and it was definitely what I needed to write at that time because I was able to explore like all this darkness. Because like when I'd been unable to communicate at all, it was like I felt extremely low, and I sort of like needed this sort of like place to process my feelings. And so I started writing this YA thriller about a girl who has the same type of brain inflammation as me, and she witnesses a crime that happens to her sister, and then her sister goes missing. But because of her brain inflammation, no one takes her seriously. And when I was sort of like in recovery, I was getting a lot of episodes of psychosis and hallucinations, and I never knew at one point what was really happening and what wasn't. So I really played on that in like this YA thriller, and yeah, I just found it like really helpful for me, like as an individual, to process everything that had happened to me. And then after I'd finished writing that manuscript, I sent it to my agent. I was like, yeah, I've written a completely new genre here. I don't really know what I'm doing. But she really loved it, and she was so enthusiastic about it. And then she was like, well, do you think you can write some more thrillers? Because she said that like the characterization was a lot stronger. And I do feel that like my thriller writing is a lot stronger than my dystopian writing. And now it's pretty much all I want to write, except I still got like a dystopian series that's ongoing, and I've still got 2 more books to write in that one. So, but yeah, so like even with my dystopian works that I'm writing now, I'm structuring them much more like thrillers, and they're reading more like thrillers just set like in these dystopian worlds. So yeah, that's how I sort of unexpectedly came to write crime and thrillers.
That's really interesting. It's really interesting to kind of hear you guys talking about how there was just like a kind of story that sort of needed to come out, and that kind of thing about, you know, using it as a vessel to explore. Because I suppose the thing about kind of crime and psychological thrillers is it is stuff that happens in the real world, isn't it? So it's a really kind of powerful tool for exploring that. I'm really interested in how kind of the process, you know, structuring it differs from writing other genres as well. So definitely going to ask you more about that later. Abby, hi, welcome. Could you, I'm going to ask you to kind of introduce yourself, introduce your writing and your most recent book, and then to kind of tell us a little bit, if it's okay, about how you started writing crime fiction.
Sure, I can certainly do that. First, I want to commend Madeline on all the stuff that she went through, and to and share that story. I actually directed her stories, an interview she did to a friend of mine who suffers with mental health issues, as so do I, and she wrote a YA. She's in the process of writing and trying to get an agent, and she had mental health issues all through her teenage years, and I pointed you out to her, and I just wanted to first say, you know, well done, job well done, and getting through that and writing a book. So I think that's excellent.
Thank you.
So my book somewhere is there in the background. Another one. I write crime fiction, but in a fun way. I guess you could say, if murder can be fun. I write cozy mysteries. A lot of people ask what they are, and they're set in these quaint little places where you'd want to move and raise your family, you know, little towns with, in my case, an ice cream shop, a waterfall, you know, the downtown area, and the little town square. In my case, it's a triangle. And it's a good place to be, except for the murder, of course. So that's what I write. I also try to put a little humor into my stories. I started out, I was fired from a job, and I was taking care of my mother. She was 82, 83 at the time. And I also had teenage children, and they were 2 different worlds to juggle, you know, to take care of. My mother didn't like anything we ate. She didn't want to do or hear any of the things we were doing and saying in the other parts of the house. So, and of course I had to cater to that, and I lost my job. So it was very traumatic, because I thought, I have, you know, basically 2 families to take care of, although they were in one household. And I remember I came home and I told my mother, and she goes, well, what are you going to do? And I said, I'm going to write a book. I don't know how I thought that would help any of my problems, but that's what I sat down to do. I've suffered from depression my entire adult life, and maybe somewhere inside I thought, this is an escape. I won't have to worry about all the things that I have to deal with taking care of everyone, if I sat down and write a book. And like Caleb, I just wrote and wrote and wrote. Eventually someone told me, oh, you can't do this and you can't do that. And I was like, who knew writing had rules? You know, I just thought I could put whatever I wanted to on that page. And I made my character suffer from depression, although she was a biblical archaeologist. She had numerous degrees, but everyone focused on that. You know, they go, this girl needs medication. So in a way, I thought, well, that's a good thing, because I made her real enough that they thought she needed to go to a doctor, you know, to try to get some help. But also, made me not want to write that. I didn't have Madeline's courage to just forge through. I decided people don't want to hear about a mental illness. They don't want to know. They had such a problem with it. And then the people that did like it didn't like that I wasn't killing everyone, around every corner. There wasn't peril around every corner. And it was sort of a Dan Brownish, if you find this one object and it saves the world kind of thing. But I didn't kill anybody. I didn't say one cuss words. There were, there was no profanity, no sex, no violence. And people thought, oh, what the heck? How do you have a thriller without any thrills, I guess? So I turned the page and I went to cozies. And I still get to kill people, which I couldn't manage to do in the first one, but I get to, put a little humor. I love to write about family. And that's what this book is, A Daily Inside Scoop. It's about a family-owned ice cream shop. I actually put it in a real place here. I live in Cleveland, Ohio. It's a suburb of Cleveland. And it's a generational store started by her grandparents in the 60s, and only family members, have worked in it. And so that's the kind of writing I presently am doing, but I'm trying to write a women's fiction book to not so much to get away from cozies, because I would still always do that. I started out self-publishing them, and then I went into traditional publishing, and it's ingrained in me. But I'd also like to venture out and try my hand at writing something different. I used to be a lawyer. I went to school for forever, and I was always buried in textbooks. And this is kind of a freeing, it actually, what went through my mind when I got fired was like something to take me away, and writing does that for me. So I'd like to branch out with that. And hopefully get issues in now. People are being more tolerant of it in books and in conversations. So I think that's a good thing to write about.
Absolutely. It's so important. Madeline and I actually had a really interesting conversation about this the other week about kind of the importance of, mental health representation in genre fiction, and how it doesn't just have to be about a single issue. You can kind of weave it in, because people are multifaceted, and it's part of their characters. And people with mental health problems, get to be the heroes of stories that aren't just about mental health. And I love, Abby, that you got to, you kind of found a way to write what you wanted to write. It's so hard, isn't it? Sometimes it feels like there's so many kind of genre conventions and expectations. And I love that you found a way to kind of write what you really wanted to and what was meaningful to you. Thank you. That's a lovely story. Cool. So next question, I'm going to open up to the whole panel, if that's okay. So kind of feel free to sort of wade in. When we get Callie back, I will repeat it for her benefit. So I wonder if you guys can kind of tell me, what do you think are the sort of the key differences between writing crime or thrillers for young adults and writing for adults? Is it just the age of the protagonist, or is it themes and topics that you cover as well? Did you catch that, Callie? Do you want me to repeat the question?
No, I don't. I'm so sorry. My partner was playing Dark Souls. My son was playing Minecraft. There was basically no internet left for me. I've just come downstairs now. My partner is no longer playing Dark Souls, so hopefully I'll stick around this time. Yes, I've heard the question. Sorry, carry on.
Okay, awesome. So I'm going to open this up to everybody, if that's okay. So yeah, what do you think are the differences between YA and adult crime fiction and thrillers?
Me.
And so, I'm sorry, to any of you.
Well, I can start. For me, usually my main character is older. Although now cozies, they're trying to kind of change the demographic to millennials, but for the most part in cozies, they're older. So they don't have all the fight and enthusiasm and the energy, that I think YA writes with. It's a lot of action. I think more action. And we're like teetotalers, just old older, more, I guess, brain oriented, thinking our way through things, asking questions. You'll read a lot of cozies where the main character poses questions to herself throughout the thing. You know, did that person kill them because of the money? And did that person do this? You know, it's more mind related. And so I think that's probably why we're trying to change to get more like YAs and have a little bit more action than what we have now, and not just you know, walking around to places and peeking over the police's shoulder and then coming up with your own ideas. So I think maybe that's one little change that one difference that we have.
It's a really interesting. Sorry, Callie, go for it.
Sorry. I think for me, a big difference is in the amount of backstory for the character, and that never doesn't necessarily go on the page. But if your main character is 43 or 51 or whatever, and you think about what has shaped them to become the person that they are, that's a lot of life experience and different things that will have shaped them. Whereas often with my young adult characters, yes, you know, they may have had awful tragedies befall them, you know, losses, parents dying, or you know, other bad experiences, but it tends to be more one thing, or, you know, a couple of things, rather than a culmination of a life experience where you become the person that you are in your 40s or your 50s because of your life experiences. I think you're still in your teens, you're still quite malleable, and you're not fixed in your thoughts and all of that kind of thing. And when I write a story, regardless of the age of the character, I think, you know, what is it that this character wants? What is it that, you know, in terms of their goal, but also what is it that they need? Like, how do they change over the course of the book? And particularly, you know, so I've had in the treatment, you know, the main character Drew has to rescue her brother. And in the book that I'm writing now for an adult audience, the main character is trying to find her missing sister. So they're very similar kind of quests, but the characters change in very different ways.
Oh, we've lost you a little bit
really
again, Callie.
Interesting what Callie is saying about the age thing. And if I can kind of like take off from that while Minecraft is messing with her internet connection. I did not set out to write YA fiction. It was a straight up thriller. I am a Hawaiian Chinese modern day ninja living in Los Angeles, and I wanted to write that kind of a character into a story because I think it's interesting and exciting, and I want a lot of action. I made her 25 because, well, I have, you know, sons who are, you know, went through that age recently. And of course, being older, I did too. It's a time in your life when everything is volatile, where you think you know everything, you think you are invincible, you make your biggest mistakes, you are courageous, you're out there. It's a really interesting time in somebody's life. 25, and you're coming of age as an adult. So now YA deals with a lot of coming of age, right? You know, the change into adult, usually it's like, you know, 17, 18, 19, that kind of a thing. But when you, from our age, having been through there, Madeline, you'll get there. I think you're a lot younger than us. I think you're a lot younger than my son. But you know, you're still trying to find your way as an adult and as an adult with your parents. So my protagonist is 25. She lives above her North Dakota Norwegian father's Chinese restaurant, if you can put that together. And she's got severe Joy Luck Club issues with her Hong Kong immigrant mother, who, you know, is like this financial wizard. And so she's constantly dealing with a cultural pull of this, Midwest thing, this immigrant thing, and her Japanese sensei. So she's a character pulled in culture, but she's really trying to cope with this age. And then her whole life gets thrown for a loop, like Callie was saying, what can happen as a trauma? Well, her first year in UCLA, her sister is raped and murdered. Well, that totally, derailed everything and what motivated her to become this, champion of women and a big sister for a city. So it's an interesting thing that I geared it toward adults because it's gritty. Lily herself doesn't use profanity, but she's around people who do. There's, the Ukrainian mob, they most definitely do. There's the Mexican gang, they definitely do. So there's that going on. There's no sex, but there's romance. However, there is sex trafficking involved in there. So, and especially in the second book, she actually is hunting for a gal, and it's a gritty issue of youth sex trafficking in Los Angeles. That's a heavy, heavy issue. And so it's dark. It's dark in that sense. But what I do is I avoid sensationalizing violence. So the violence that are in my books are, you have the confidence that Lily will be okay. Right? That's important. And so no matter how dangerous the situation that she's in, you pretty well know that's going to be okay at some level, not for everybody, but, I think there's also, I try and be careful, even with adults, I try and be careful that I don't describe things so horrifically that it I want to impact you. I want it to be poignant. I want it to move you. I want it to be heartbreaking, but I'm going to pull you up and let it be empowering. And I think that's a difference. So I didn't realize it was appealing to YA until I had a 12-year-old fan in Canada, this little Chinese gal, who actually made a motion picture using these cute little dolls for her high school junior high school theater project. So I don't know.
Oh, that's so cool.
That's amazing. But so it raises a really interesting question, actually, Tori, which, are there any topics or, that are too dark for a YA audience? Is there anything that YA shouldn't touch, do you think?
I don't study the genre enough to know a lot, a definitive answer to that. But having raised my sons and watching them during those ages and the kinds of entertainment that they consumed, I'm inclined to say no. There isn't a limit on it. It's just more a way that you handle it.
I agree with that. I think a lot of what it comes down to, because if you think about it, teenagers are still consuming the same information that we are. They are still dealing with they're living in the same world that we are. I think a lot of it, to agree with what Callie was saying, a lot of what it comes down to is how the character processes this information and what they do with it based on their life experience. I think that people who expect YA to have sort of to not deal with those issues are mostly adults, in my experience. Like the adults who read YA don't want really dark topics, but I think teenagers are much more expansive in their interests. Yeah, I sort of think, also to agree with what Callie said, I think a lot of times when you're writing YA, you're talking about like a thriller, it's the defining event in this character's life. Whereas for a lot of adult fiction, especially if it's a series or if it's a procedural, you're talking about somebody who, like this is something that they encounter regularly. If it's a detective, it's a journalist, or for like cozy mysteries, like there's every installment there's like the dead body at the inn, so this is something that happens that they are accustomed to, that they have a coping mechanism, they have a series of ways that they deal with this, whereas with teenagers they presumably don't. I remember after my debut somebody asked me if I was going to write a sequel to it, and I was like, I love these characters, but I don't know that I can justify this random 15-year-old kid stumbling over another corpse. Like, I just couldn't figure out how to make that realistic. Because I was like, this really changed his life, has completely altered the way that he thinks about the world. And so that's how I approached that story and how I processed the traumas that he experienced through that lens.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Caleb. It's really, I think, teenagers go through difficult stuff. Teenagers go through, really distressing and traumatic things. These things don't just happen to adults, they happen to kids as well. So I'm kind of inclined to agree with you. I think that, it's the way you approach the topic that's important. It's really interesting to kind of hear you, because you've all got quite different, writing in different age groups. But of course, it makes perfect sense that, the age of the protagonist, their sort of developmental, kind of the point they're at developmentally, their life experiences are going to completely change the way they engage with the plot and the situations that you put them in. It's really kind of fascinating to hear about that. Madeline, what do you think about that? Any thoughts about kind of the difference between adult and YA crime?
Yeah, well, I was just thinking from the point of view of like the protagonists with YA, pretty much any sort of teen reader is going to sort of be able to relate pretty well to a teenage protagonist. Whereas in adults, like you've got the whole police procedural genre, and you've got these police characters who are going to have access to so many resources that the average person wouldn't. So, like for me, I'm particularly drawn to writing YA thrillers because I, as like the writer, is probably going to be like in the same place as a reader as well, because like I don't know that much about police procedure, so it's very much like the reader's going to be on the same page as like the main character if they're a teenager. And I find that it just sort of like makes it more sort of more relatable for a reader to be able to relate to a teenage protagonist, especially in my own experience as a reader. But yeah, like the sort of like representation of police, particularly in YA, it's very much limited to sort of like you've got like this policeman character usually, and they're quite like presented as an obstacle who will stop the main character from doing like the investigative work, or they're told, or the police is telling the teenager that they can't solve this crime when in fact they will be the ones to do it. And it's a completely different depiction of police in adult books often, especially if it is a police procedural. So yeah, I was just thinking like that's quite like one of the big differences between sort of like YA thrillers and adult.
Well, I think I'm the adult that Caleb was talking about, because initially I was thinking, yes, no, you should not put certain things in YA, because these 15-year-olds who usually in these YA things, the parents are missing anyway. They have enough things going on. You don't read a lot about what the parent is doing, or the parent is stopping them from doing a lot of times. But after he explained it, I totally agree. I think in adult or in YA or even middle grade books, that it's how they interact with the trouble. I think that is, wow, such a good point, and something I'm definitely going to store in my chest. It's how you deal with it and how you let your character come out of it. Usually I'm sure there's happy endings, and so that's good. And I guess those are lessons to be taught. And maybe with that, then maybe there doesn't have to be a different, even in my old adult mind, of a difference in how you write the YA and adult crime. So.
I really like what you were saying about that, Madeline, about the age group and the teenagers, and being able to do things in spite of the adult authority. I think that may be why Lily Wong, even at 25, is so appealing at that age, is because everything is ninja rebellion, and she has that kind of clash. But also in this upcoming book, I was wondering how this is, and I'm still wondering because it doesn't come out until September 1st. So many of the characters are high school age. She's hunting for a high school age girl, and she runs into all these characters in this world. And it ends up being a really important cautionary tale, because I want to really show the danger that all of our girls are facing. And so when I think of that as a parent, you know what? I want my teenager knowing what kind of dangers are out there. I don't want her to be, paranoid and upset and, freaking out every second, but I want her to be aware or him. I want them to be aware. And I think teenagers, like Caleb was saying, want to be aware. They know what's going out there. This is part of their world. These are their concerns. They want to know what's going on, and they want to, just like us adults, go into entertainment that deals with things that matter to them.
Absolutely.
I think it very much depends on the YA age group that your book is being sort of pushed towards, because for the treatment, I had 10 and 11-year-olds reading that, and it had no violence, it had no sex, it had no bad language. It didn't even have any particularly dark themes. It was in its own way, it's a kind of action adventure, sort of save the brother, save the world sort of thing. But the new book, The Island, is definitely not suitable for 10 and 11-year-olds. It's got self-harm, mental health, bereavement, violence. So if I knew of any 10 or 11-year-olds reading that, I would be like, no. This one is definitely 13 and up, I would say.
I think that's a really great point. I've had parents ask me, is this okay for my son or daughter? And my answer has been, read it first.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Some of your work's quite interesting, Kelly, because quite a lot of your adult writing also sort of is from the point of view of parents, I think, and who have teenage children, and the children are kind of at the centre of the the puzzle, the mystery, or the problem that's going on, and that must be quite a different experience as well to write from that perspective.
Yeah, and interestingly, I have young people read my adult books too, which always really disturbs me if I get a letter from a 13-year-old who's read one of my adult books. I'm a bit like, ooh. But yes, it's very different. You are looking at it from the adult's perspective. So that was the first one, The Accident, and which one? Third. I forget which one, but the third one, The Missing, when Billy, a teenager, goes missing. But also in The Fear, which is about a woman who was groomed by her karate teacher, then sees him years later grooming another teenager. So yeah, you're absolutely right. I often have teenagers in the book, and actually in The Fear, I do write it from Chloe's point of view, but she's not as active. The teenagers in my adult books are not as active a character as they would be in my YA. There it's all about the parent or the older adult character who is pursuing a goal or whatever. But I try to make them as rounded as my YA protagonists.
Thanks, Kelly. Thank you. That was really. I feel like we could just keep on talking about this all evening, really. But I wanted to sort of touch on something that you mentioned, Madeline, which is that obviously adults, solving crimes, have a lot of resources available to them. It's quite plausible for an adult to be a police officer and have be able to solve a crime. There's a particular difficulty with writing for teenagers in that they don't have that kind of freedom and those resources. Are there any particular challenges in writing sort of crime novels for a YA readership or with a teenage protagonist?
Well, the main thing that I found is that you can't sort of rely on sort of any of the forensic stuff that would typically play a massive role in particularly a police procedural. So any evidence that teenagers find, it's got to be sort of accessible to them in a way that they can then see it as evidence sort of straight away. So it does sort of mean that it's got to be sort of interpretable on the surface level. But I do find that easier writing a YA thriller from that point of view, because it also means I haven't got to do loads of research into police procedure. So
it's a blessing and a curse. So you have to be more creative about how they find the breadcrumbs that lead them to the. But you also, precisely what Madeline said. There's a lot that you don't have to think about as well.
Yeah.
Well, I think maybe then that the YA the characters have to be a lot smarter. because it is, you know, older you go to the police, you find things out, you talk to other adults, people recognize you. You know, who talks to a 17-year-old about a crime? Oh, you shouldn't, you know, it's me, the adult, saying, oh, no, you don't need to know about that. So for you guys to be able to write this story and they figure out, you know, or take part in this crime, I think that it takes a lot more of, you know, your character being a lot more ingenious, a lot more, you know, involved. And I think that's a good point. I think you probably get better characterizations. My main character in this book is 28, and she's, you know, a millennial, so she Googles a lot and you know, gets help from the internet and social media platforms. But you know, it's a dead body and it's not a lot of, you know, I write cozy, so there's no action, and certainly none of the things like Tori puts in that definitely could not fly, you know, in a cozy mystery. So I like the idea of being more intuitive.
I guess there must be a similar thing for you, Tori, because your protagonist isn't kind of she's not part of the police force. She's not kind of she's sort of out on her own, sort of doing this, isn't she? So she must have, although she's a little bit older, she must have similar issues, I suppose, with kind of getting information and getting access to things.
Yeah, she has a very young approach, millennial approach to life. She lives in Los Angeles. She does not own a car. She refuses to own a car. She owns a racing bike, and she's connected with rideshare. And she meets this one gal who's a rideshare driver who becomes like her emergency rideshare driver. And she occasionally borrows her father's Chinese restaurant delivery car, but mostly it's either racing bike and using LA Metro. So there's a real millennial sense of, no, you know what? We don't need to own things. I don't need to own my house. I don't need to, you know, have my own apartment. I don't need to own a car. There are other ways of going about things to live and operate in an urban city. And that's a very millennial kind of mindset. So that's one thing. The other thing is she works part-time doing web consulting. So she helps people with their social media presence, with their websites presence, and with their security on that. Meanwhile, she's wiped herself from social media. So there's that kind of a thing. She learns about, she works with a women's shelter. So there doesn't need to, you know, she's fed a lot of women who are in trouble and women and children who are in trouble. And that's how we aim low. I mean, young, you know what I mean? That's how she meets this gal, Emma, who's a high school student. So there are these kinds of things. And then, of course, with the ninja strategies and techniques, which, by the way, are very real things, you know, she's using that to rescue, infiltrate, protect, and do things. So in a sense, there isn't anything that she's doing or the way that she's living that couldn't be lived as, you know, for a teenager or aspired to very easily. It doesn't require, you know, an MFA. It doesn't require, you know, any kind of license or things like that. So yeah, I think that probably has something else to do with it. A real renegade.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I can really see why those would be really appealing to, you know, I think I would have loved reading books like that when I was a teenager, still would, in fact. Callie, I wondered for you, because you started out writing, you wrote quite a few sort of adult thrillers before you wrote a YA one, is that right? Was there anything that kind of tripped you up when you wrote your first YA one, anything you sort of had to unlearn to kind of write for a YA audience instead, or with a younger protagonist?
This is probably going to be really annoying, but I actually found writing the YA easier than the adult books. And I, you know, whereas my adult books can be a bit of a slog and take sort of 4 to 5 months, most of my YA I've written in about 2. I mean, partly that is to do with the word length, but with both ideas, the reason that I wrote the YA is because I had this idea that just would not go away. And that's how most of my books, come into being. Basically, I loved the TV show Prison Break. And I thought, what would happen if I put some kids in a prison break type situation? How ingenious would they be to like find their way out?
Wow, yeah.
And that was the idea that that kind of sparked it. And I wrote it. I had no deal in place. I was already writing all of my adult books, but it was like a passion project, something that I had to write to get out there. And the same for the island, actually. That was an idea that I pitched to my adult publisher about a bunch of people on an island where all their worst fears come true. And they said, that's not very C.L. Taylor. It's a bit too horror. So I pitched it to my YA editor instead, and she was like, "Yeah, go for it." So it was brilliant. It's a story that I want to tell, and yeah, I'd like to be able to say that there was anything that I had to unlearn or whatever, but no, I found it much easier. You're probably all going to hate me now.
Not at all. We've had a really interesting question from somebody watching, so Anna. So I'm going to go to this next, if that's okay. Anna says, really enjoying listening to you all. Would you mind addressing the topic of setting as character in the crime novel? Abby talked about it in the cozy mystery. Are your settings based on real places? So yeah, I think, Tori, you've kind of referred to your settings being very real and very alive. And so Abby, I'm going to come to you first, if that's okay. Could you? Yeah.
So I thank you for asking that question, Anna. And I think that setting is a character in your story. And for a crime story, I think that it's very important because you have to make your environment conducive to you being able to solve this crime, or that this is a place where this crime takes place. So I think it's really important for that reason. But you also have to be careful of, if you decide to use a real place, which I did this time, and in that very first book that I wrote, I actually used a real place. After that, I always used fictional places because it's hard when to portray the city. You always want to put it in a good light. You don't want people from that place, reviewing you with a 1 or writing to you saying that can never happen. I gave the example another time that I talked about this. I wrote a book in a fictional place, but it was in Georgia and close to the Savannah River. And I picked some highway for my main character to drive down. And in the book, I said, and she looked to her left and there was the Savannah River. And someone gave me a 1 star and said, you can't see the Savannah River from that. So, for cozies, it's easy because it's a quaint place. It's a place where, gossip birds hang out, because that's how you get the crime solved. People come and tell you what their neighbor said and they saw them fighting with the victim, or, whatever happens. We don't usually use a lot of police in that because it's the amateur sleuth who wants to solve it. And so you have to give it, I guess, a Mayberry kind of feel, Barney Fife kind of feel, where he has 1 bullet and he's not allowed to use it. A lot of times they want to make the police, the law enforcement kind of bumbling. I don't do that. I used to be a lawyer. I respect how the law goes, and that things are done in a certain way for a certain reason. But also I know that law enforcement agents will come to people and ask, have you seen anything? Do you know anything? And that's kind of how I set my protagonists up. But it's definitely in cozy's setting is a character that is very important to my crime, to the kind of crimes that are committed.
Yeah, I really like that that's it's not just about the kind of the geography, the sort of physical layer. It's about the kind of the community and the kind of feel and the sort of ethos and the way people behave in that setting that really shapes the book. Thank you, Abby. Yeah, Madeline, tell us about where are your thrillers set? Are they kind of real world? I know some of them are sort of in a dystopian setting. What about your other thrillers? Are they in a real world setting or?
Yeah, so I live in Devon, right next to Dartmoor. So the two thrillers that I've written at the moment, which are like a contemporary setting, are actually both Dartmoor. Like they're set pretty much on the moors, and the moors is where the crimes happen. So like I get really inspired by the moors anyway, and it's like quite a gothic like setting anyway. So like I do sort of like think about how like in Wuthering Heights you've got the moors there, and that's very much like a character in itself. So I was drawing my inspiration from that, and well, obviously living right next to Dartmoor as well, like I can just sort of like walk out my house onto Dartmoor. So yeah, I've been sort of like grounding my thrillers very much in sort of like the rugged Dartmoor landscape, and but I haven't sort of, in one of them I specifically mentioned like specific tours that are like the real names of tours and like actual lakes, so like someone could actually map it out onto like the areas of Dartmoor to see like the walks that the characters go on and where the different like murders take place. But then with my other one, I didn't sort of like set it in exactly a real place that is identifiable on Dartmoor. It's sort of like an amalgamation of different parts of Dartmoor, and this thriller has actually sort of got a slightly supernatural element as well. So I found that sort of basing it on a real life setting, but twisting it a bit to make it a bit different, and it helped me make it more eerie as well. And I think that's really helped with like creating the atmosphere and tone, and especially like sort of playing into like this supernatural and like the ghostly element that I brought into that thriller. So yeah, that's my thrillers with like the real life settings, because I'm very much inspired by like actual real places. So I do try to like base it on real places and sort of like bring that sort of like infuse it all into my writing.
And Dartmoor's such an amazing, is such a great resource for writing that, that kind of, something with that kind of atmosphere and that kind of tone to it. Like you say, that kind of bleakness and wildness about it. So yeah, it sounds amazing. And similar to kind of what Abby was saying, so you can kind of capture the feel of something without having to be like really precise about, this street and this tour. And yeah, cool. Caleb, how about where are yours set?
So I agree with Abby. I think environment is so important for like it is a character in its own right in the story, because it really informs how the story takes shape. My debut I actually set in my hometown. Death Prefers Blondes I wrote after we left LA, and I was really missing it. So it's sort of my love letter to Los Angeles, and I filled it with some of my favorite locations. The Fell of Dark is actually set in a fictional suburb of Chicago, and I made it fictional for the reason that I wanted it to be very generic. I wanted it to be, any town. It's about this kid who lives in this boring city where nothing ever happens except the occasional undead cult rolling in and trying to kill everybody and bring about the end of the world. But I wanted it to feel like it could be anywhere, and I wanted it to, the story, it's sort of this character feels very trapped in this, like he feels misunderstood and overlooked, and he's in this place that he doesn't relate to. And then this massive colossal thing happens to him. This, like, literally the end of the world is approaching, and what is he going to do about it? And what does he really want? Like, what is his life, and what does he really want out of his life? When the possibility that life as we all know it could cease to exist entirely, how does he relate that to his current environment? So I also really wanted this to be this really huge, big story stuck in this really small, like nothing of a town, because I often find thrillers set in small towns are the most intriguing to me. There is something about the intimacy of small town life that really, it's finding out that everybody has a secret. There's just something so appealing about that as a writer.
There's something incredibly universal about that kind of experience, of growing up in a small town, but wrestling with these huge questions about your life and your future and who you want to be and what kind of world you're going to, be sort of moving into. So there's something really interesting in that dynamic.
Yeah.
Tori, you kind of talked, I've got a real sense, of kind of the setting as character in you. It sounds like it's a really kind of important part of your books. Have you got anything to sort of add to that? Any thoughts on that?
Ooh, I muted that. It's huge. It's not just a character, it's a metaphor. So, Lily is a mixed race, culturally oriented person living in one of the most diverse cities in the United States. She is a microcosm of Los Angeles, or Los Angeles is a macrocosm of Lily, however you want to look at it, but it's a very intentional choice. The other thing is I've lived here for over 35 years, and I wanted to show the different areas and communities and cultures in my city that you may not normally see, things that are kind of offbeat. In the same way that I wanted to share parts of my own Chinese and Norwegian heritage, and the way that I wanted to share the actual training and process of people who train in modern day ninjutsu, the art of the ninja. So authenticity was a real big goal for me in all of these things, in culture, in fighting, in the city. And so that was huge. Unlike, what you guys were saying about the fictional thing is very important for me that when you turn right, when you look right, you actually can see what you should be able to see. And so I live on Google Maps. Right now, the third Lily book, she goes to Hong Kong. I was fortunate enough to go to Hong Kong because, as luck would have it, my son fell in love with a Hong Konger. What are the odds? I mean, he married her. So, it's just unbelievable. So we got to be with her family together for New Year's and Christmas a couple years back in Hong Kong. So that was really great. But in addition to, being somewhere, having lived there or visited there, being able to use Google Maps to be able to read and listen to the music and all of those things, to get a sense for your place and the community and bring it to life so that it is a character, that kind of thing is hugely important to me. So I spent an awful lot of time trying to figure out, where does this character live? I can tell you the street address. I won't tell it to you because it's somebody else's house, but I know where it is, and I know what community is, and I've chosen it for a very specific reason. And when my character is getting from one place to another, traffic in LA, traveling in LA, it's huge, right, Caleb? Oh my God, right? It's a major part of our life. And especially if she's going to take metro, especially if she's going to hop on a bike, especially if she's going to have to run it, whatever. And she does a lot of these things. She's very energetic. The route that she takes and how long it will take and the time of day it will take, these things are hugely important to me.
Every Angelino has their shortcuts. They know their own shortcuts across town, and it is very specific to the person.
Oh yeah.
I think that's so important in every story. So I want to write a story I'm thinking about that takes place in Mississippi, but I feel such a void in trying to start to write this because I've never been to Mississippi. I may have been to Mississippi, but I've never been to this place. So I think that goes to show how important place is, because I don't know this place. I feel like I can't write this place. I won't do it justice. I can't describe it to my readers. I want my readers to feel just like they're there. And how do you do that? Google Maps is wonderful. I wrote a book one time and I was walking down an Italian street and I was able to put right into my book, all the things I saw as I walked virtually down this street in Italy. I saw the coffee shop. I got to see the street names, and I said, so in my book, I put as I crossed this street, so it's a good thing. And I think that even some writers may not realize when they're writing their story, how much setting plays into their writing, but so it may just be subconsciously that they do, like maybe with Tori or Caleb, because, it's like you have your own vibes about the streets and how they are and the people and things are. So whether you do it subconsciously or consciously, I think writers do put that character of setting in there, and it's hard to bring a story together without, knowing your surroundings and knowing how important that is.
Yeah, like Abby, I really like to have been to the place I'm writing about, because I mean, I have written 2 books where I have not been to the places. One is The Island, because I didn't have time to go to Thailand. You know, I was like, I know exactly the same. I can claim it back on tax and everything. But I just didn't have time that year because I wrote 2 books. So I couldn't go away. And the other one was the Isle of Rum, which is an island off the coast of Scotland. Again, I didn't have time to go there. So all the research I did was watching YouTube videos, was Google Maps, was Street View, was, you know, all of that kind of stuff. And it just, I mean, I think you can probably get away with it. You know, the chances are the reader, unless they know the place really in minute detail, won't know, unless you make some terrible clangers. But there's nothing like going to a place to feel the energy of it, to what can you hear, what can you smell, you know, how windy is it. I went to Gozo, which is an island off Malta, after Christmas to research half of the adult book that I'm writing now, and I couldn't have made it as vivid if I hadn't gone there. I couldn't have said, right, that's where I'm going to have my sweat lodge where 2 people are going to die, if I hadn't gone there and walked along the cliffs and seen like a low wall of stones. So yeah, if I can, I absolutely will go to places to research, or I'll cheat and set them in Bristol where I live.
That works too.
I so agree with that. I have other books that I've written yet to be published. They're being shopped. One of them is set in Brazil, and the other one is set in Bali. And enormous, copious research went into getting a feel for that, as well as things that I could do at home involving music and learning a bit of the language and listening to music and dance. But when I went to those places, and I went to both of them, like you said, it's the feel of the humidity or the lack of humidity. It's the energy of some places have an energy of danger or excitement or laid backness. And you can't read about that. You just, all of a sudden you go, whoa, I feel that. And a certain smell. It's like, there's always a certain smell. What is up with that? You know, where is that coming from? Why is that? Is everybody cooking the same thing? You know, and these things are so important, and you put it in there, and it's just that little nuance of authenticity that makes people go, wow, I'm there. And I love that. I love that when readers say, ooh, I felt like I was there. I'm like, yes.
And it's all that really subtle sensory detail, isn't it? That really, you can't, you have to be there to get it.
Yeah, you can't make it up.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. So next I was going to ask about writing processes, what your kind of writing processes are like, whether they're different, you know, between YA and adult, and whether, you know, those of you who've written in different genres, are they different for them? And then Anna's asked us another question, which I think kind of ties in quite nicely to this, which is how do you choose the names of your characters, which, as we know, is a really important part of the writing process. So yeah, could I ask you guys to share a little bit about that? Caleb, maybe could you start us off?
Sure. So in terms of process, for me, it's the same regardless of the age range that I'm writing for. I'm a plotter, and I learned that the hard way when I wrote that first manuscript, and I didn't know what I was doing, and it ended up being ridiculously long. So I found that I need to work from an outline, especially if I'm writing a mystery, because I need to know who done it, I need to know how they done it, and I need to know how my main character is going to figure it out. So I have to figure out what my clues are. I've got to figure out how they're going to uncover them. I've got to figure out what the red herrings are, because otherwise I will write myself into a corner, and I will have to write my way back out, and then I'll find myself in a different corner, and I will have given everybody an airtight alibi, and the crime is physiologically impossible to have been committed. So I have to map all these things out ahead of time, and then I usually write in a 4-act structure, and I will work from that moving forward. Yeah. And in terms of finding names for the characters, on rare occasion, the characters will name themselves for me. Like at least, you know, 2 or 3 characters per book the names will come into my head, and that'll just be who they are. For others, I will often find that, especially for like secondary cast members, I really have to find names that I feel like rhythmically that they work with the main character's name, that they fit, so that oh my gosh, I had a character who I had characters in one of my books, and they were friends, and I accidentally named them Zach and Cody, like the TV show. And I was like, and I realized it very late, and I was like, oh no. So I went in and I changed one of the characters' names, and then inadvertently made two brothers, Kyle and Lyle. And I was like, what am I doing? So it is really important to, I actually did not realize this until after the book had been published, but the parents of the main character in my debut novel are named Will and Kate, and I didn't catch that until it was, so sometimes like it does infiltrate your subconscious, but yeah, so sometimes naming the characters, it is very much like you spin the wheel and you've got to hope it lands on the right. Yeah, so it is a process.
I can see lots of people laughing and nodding here, so I think this is an affliction for writers by the looks of it. Anything to add to that, Madeline? Can I come to you next? Can you tell us about your writing process?
Yeah, so like my writing process is like, well, I haven't really written any adult fiction, so it's primarily just like YA fiction, but I have written a draft of a picture book, which is currently with my agent. And with both a picture book and all my YA writing, I don't plot at all. I don't plan. I go straight into it and just completely free write a really messy first draft that is like the most terrible thing I've ever written every single time. But that's how I get to know who my characters are. And it's not until I've got to the end of that first draft, which is absolutely awful, no one can ever read it. But once I'm at the end of it, I kind of know what kind of story I want to tell. So then my revision process and editing is very much working out which bits I've written are salvageable and sort of like restructuring those, working out which subplots I actually need to build in. And yeah, because like I found if I did try to plot first, I completely lose interest in what I'm writing because it feels like I've already told the story and I'm just not motivated to then tell it again. So I have to sort of like have this element of discovering the story alongside my main characters. Yeah, and in terms of names, I'm very much like Caleb. Like my main characters often sort of like come to me with their names already, and I just like know that is their name. But I do have this thing where I will end up with one character in every manuscript, and this always happens, and I don't know why, where their first name rhymes with their last name. And with my last manuscript, I was sure I'd avoided it, sent it off to my agent, and then I suddenly realised one of the main characters' mothers is called Ruby, and their surname is Newbury, and I'd done it again. So yeah, it just happens like every single manuscript I write. I don't know why it happens, but and then I usually don't realise until like after I've sent it off to like an agent or someone. So yeah, like I need to be much more aware of that now in terms of names. But yeah, like naming secondary characters, that's like probably where I find it harder to do because like Caleb said, you've got to sort of like make sure that the names work with your main cast's names as well. So it's quite nice, and like I do like have like a name dictionary, like baby name book, and I spend like hours just like randomly going through there and just like picking one out at random and seeing if I like it. And then I often look up the meaning behind names as well because I quite like sort of like incorporating that into their personality if I can.
I cannot tell you the hours of my life I've spent agonising over the names of characters who appear in one scene and are completely irrelevant. Thank you, Madeline. That's really interesting. It sounds. I guess if once you get to know the character, they can kind of shape the plot, right? They, once you know them and you know how they're going to react to things, that might lead you down different paths in terms of figuring out where your story goes. So. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Abby, how about you? What's your writing process like?
Well, I tell everyone don't follow my writing process because I write on the back of envelopes, on the back of receipts. I talk it to my phone, but then I forget, which tape it is, and so I don't go back to listen to it. I write on napkins at restaurants if I hear ideas. Whenever I write, I start off chapter 1. I name the chapter 1, but all the other chapters are chapter next because I write them just as I think of them. I don't know what order they will eventually go in. I don't even know how I will tie them together because one chapter may be a conversation I heard when I went to to eat at Olive Garden with the people behind me. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. I'm going to put that in the book, but, and I don't necessarily know if it'll fit in this book, but I want to put it in, so then I have to find a way to connect them. And as far as the crime and the whodunits, like Caleb says, I usually do it kind of like a math problem. How you cheat on a math problem in school? You don't know the answer, so you go to the back of the book where the answers are, and then you work backwards from the answer, because I can go back and figure out how they got to the answer from the original question. So sometimes if I have written myself into a corner and I don't know like what clues to put in, I'll go and I'll write the chapter where they found when they're saying this is what happened, this is the guy and this is how he did it, and I write that out, and then I think, oh, so if they knew this, I have to put that somewhere in the book, so I'll go back to the front of the book. So eventually, and I don't know how, it all comes together because I don't do drafts. I'm not like Madeline. Once I write the story one time, it's done. I never read it again. Although it's a different experience with an editor, traditionally published, because they want you to read it again and again. And I'm like, I don't want to read it. I know this story. But especially with my self-published books, I finish it, it goes to editor, and whatever she says, I fix, but I don't go in and read it. So I do the one draft, and all my messiness comes together somehow. And then for names, I have to feel the names. I know that sounds so crazy, but I have to say it. I like Madeline, I search baby names, but I do it on the internet. And then I have to say them out loud, and I have to pretend I'm talking to them and say their name, because it just has to feel right for that character. So I don't, my one thing I always do are alliterations. So I'll always, and I just leave them though, I don't change them. I'll always have a person, I don't know how I do it, where their first name and their last name both will start with the same letter. I always do that to at least one character. And when I do that, I leave it. Most times I leave it. So yeah, for me, names are a feeling. I kind of feel who that person is, and their names, I think, should match that feeling that I have. So it's all magical and out of body kind of experience, very mind related. So.
It sounds magical.
Yeah.
Callie, how about you? What's your writing process like? Like, so you've got who's your friend?
Yeah, this is Lily, my cockapoo. Hi, it's like, why are you sitting on the floor and not playing? I'll just leave her. She'll bring me a toy in a minute because she'll want to play. So you're really distracting. Get in your bed. My writing process. I have tried every writing process. I think over the course of 12 books that I've written. I started like with the 3-act structure. Oh no, I started with the hero's journey. First book I ever wrote was Hero's Journey. Then 3-act structure. Then I pantsed one, which was a massive mistake. I've never had such terrible edits in my life. I'll never pants another novel. What else did I do? I read that James Patterson writes outlines, and it makes the writing process faster. So I did a 5,000 word outline and a 13,000 word outline for 2 different books. And the 13,000 word outline destroyed the book for me because I felt like I'd written it. So writing the whole thing again after that was a nightmare. But now I use the 4-act structure. I've got a great book by a fellow writer called Alexandra Sokolov called Stealing Hollywood. Oh, you know it as well, wicked. Oh yeah. Yeah, she's great. And that book is like my Bible. Whenever I come to start a new book, I'm like, right, I'm going to read through Alexandra's book again, and then I will plot. I used to be quite a strict plotter. So as well as my 8-sequence climaxes, I'd have lots and lots and lots of scenes. Now I'm a bit more loose. I normally have the 8-sequence climaxes and the odd scene, and then the rest I make up because I don't want to lose too much of the magic of ideas popping into my head. Character names. I have this thing where the same names always come into my head. So I'll think, right, okay, I need a female character's name. And I'll be like, Jess. No, I had Jess. And then, I need a surname. How about Harding? No, I've had Harding. And it's weird, my brain's on a loop. So what I often do is if I know the age of the character, I will Google popular baby names in 1973, 1988, whatever, and I'll look through until one jumps out as me as a good fit for the character. And with other ones, it's literally, yes, that's the right name. With The Accident, the female male character is called Drew, because in my head, her dad had once told her that she looked like Drew Barrymore, or her dad loved Drew Barrymore, and she was born. It was like Drew. And also because she's kind of feisty, I didn't want her to have a really girly name. So the name has to fit their character, their age. But yeah, I have the same issues as you guys with getting names that don't rhyme, or the alliteration, or that they clash in some way. And I often go on Facebook to look for surnames. So I'll find a friend and then I'll click on their friends. Then I'll look through their friends list. And then if a surname comes out as me, that's what I go with.
I've done that too.
How about you, Tori? You a plotter, pantser? How does your writing process work?
Well, my writing path started in screenwriting. And so that's why my process is very similar to Alexandra Sokolov, who I met through International Thriller Writers. I haven't read her books, but I've read enough of her blogs to know that we use a very similar process. So I think she writes great stuff on that. So I do, like the three of you, a 4-act structure, with the second and third act being the big middle, which is always twice as long. And so I tend to write from the inside out. So I come up with, either a character or a premise, a log line, as it were, and that idea gets bigger and bigger. Usually it comes with me taking a hike into the hills, and that expands. And then I take another hike in the hills, and then it really expands. And then I go, got it. And then I go into Scrivener, which is what I'm using now. I used to use a stand-up poster board because it ends up being exactly a 4-act structure with the big middle, right? And I used to use Post-it notes, but Scrivener does the same thing digitally, which is wonderful. It's like they stepped into my brain and went, oh, and I'm like, thank you. So what I do is I set it up with those 4 acts and I populate it with chapters based on what I have worked out on my hikes of how I think this is going to go. And I've written enough that I know basically how many roughly of my chapters will go into a given act. And what this does is it helps me with pacing and it helps me with excitement, because I write fast-paced action thrillers, or at least the Lily Wong series is, right? So it's but she also incorporates all this family stuff, all this cultural stuff, relationship stuff, but it's got to keep it going, right? So what happens is every act has its own turning point and climax. So you have 4 of those. So that's a lot of turning points and climaxes that keep driving things. And then in Scrivener, you can also label your chapters with color, which I used to do with sticky notes, which helps me keep track of action scenes, family scenes, relationship scenes, so that I can take at a glance and look and say, oh, wow, I've got way too much action here, or I've let it go, or I haven't seen her family, and my God, people are going to forget who they are. So it's important to me that the reader is never left too long away from a subplot, a person, a significant relationship, a character arc, and of course, action, right? Some kind of jeopardy, fighting, chasing, something that's going on. So the 4-act structure is really key with me. That's really helpful. I don't have a problem with losing interest in my story or feeling like I, been there, done that, because each one of these stages is incredibly creative to me, but in a different way. So once I get this chapter by chapter outline, and all of them have little summaries, some bigger than most, that will give me a clue. The thing that's been so great about this, when I got the 2-book deal for the Ninja Daughter, I had another book completely written and sequels to both of those books, completely outlined, summarized, and partially written. And then I stepped away from them to write the Lily Wong series. And I had a 5th book already mapped out and partially written. And I've been able to go back years later and pick it up because it's all there. But what happens when I'm writing is a totally different thing. That's when chapters I thought were going to happen don't happen. That's when characters I didn't know suddenly become huge and pop up out of nowhere. And it's like, oh, okay. And that's cool. And that's exciting. And when I write the chapters, they tend to go different places that are really exciting to me. And that's cool. And I'm willing to go there. But I always have that security net. And I need the security net of knowing, that I won't get to chapter 2 and act 2 and go, oh, wow, I got a book with no act 2. It's like, no, I got an act 2. It's right there. So that's that. Names. Oh, wow. They're hugely important to me because so many of my characters are ethnic. Even in the other books, right? The one set in Bali, the one set in Brazil, and the one set in Los Angeles. There's so many ethnic communities, even above and beyond Lily's own, that these names become really important. The kinds of names, the meanings of names, like you guys are thinking. Lily's mother is Violet Wong. Lily is Lily Wong. Her sister who died is Rose Wong. Violet, Lily, Rose. This is a common thing in Chinese. You'll find a lot of Chinese families, the girls all have flower names. It's a very common thing. It's a very natural thing. I didn't initially set out consciously. I gave Lily Wong her name. Facebook. One of my friends on Facebook is also a dear friend who I did cats with over 30 years ago. We were in the original first national company of cats together. Back when I was, Madeline's age, younger. And her name was Lily Wong. And I went, you know what? I'm going to name my character Lily Wong. And just as kind of an ironic thing, her dad gives her a nickname, Dumpling. And I just thought it was so cool. And because a friend of mine, a Chinese friend of mine, has a nickname of Dumpling. And I always thought that was so cool. And I thought, how neat would it be to have this ninja warrior chick, right? This badass, kick-ass woman, right? Okay, YA, I'm throwing the ass word around. Sorry, y'all. With a nickname called Dumpling. I'm like, yes, I love that. So that's really cool. And then her father, who is possibly the most endearing character in the book, who she calls Baba, his actual name is Vern Knudsen. And here's a little Easter egg. My cousin, her husband, on whom I almost base this character because he's a salt of the earth type of farmer, his name is Vern. And I was told that my maiden name, which is Brennu, something like that, I don't know how you pronounce it in Norwegian, but that was a town. And I had heard somewhere that our actual name may or may not have been Knudsen. And so I thought, well, how fun. So I'm going to name him Vern Knudsen. So yeah, all the characters in all of my books, any books, the names, they have stories.
Amazing.
Yeah, you don't have to know about the reader, but if you ask me, I can give you a story.
Yeah. That's really fascinating. It's really fascinating to hear all about how, the differences and similarities with all your writing processes. I'm in awe of how organised some of you are. Thank you so much, all of you. We are running a little over time. If we've got time, I'd really love to just to finish off, to come to each of you, to give a piece of, if there's one piece of advice you could share for aspiring writers, what would it be? Madeline, can I start with you?
Yeah, like my main piece of advice would just be to have fun and enjoy what you're working on and enjoy the actual writing of it. Because I know if I'm not enjoying what I'm writing, then readers are going to be able to tell that. So I think it's just really important to have fun when you're writing and also to read widely as well.
Absolutely. Thank you, Madeline. Callie, how about you?
Yeah, I was just thinking, I think the books that are the most powerful are the ones that are difficult to write because you put something that you feel very powerfully into it. That doesn't mean that you need to write an autobiography. A lot of writers, their first book is basically a fictionalized autobiography, and you're so close to it that you can't see where it doesn't work from a fiction point of view. But if you can take that passion about whatever the thing is that makes you feel enraged or make you feel excited, whatever, put that into a book, that will come across to your readers. And those, I think, are the books that people can't stop turning the pages. So many writers I know who were between contracts, who'd been sort of writing the books that their publishers expect them to write, then had like a year or so where they didn't have a contract, and they wrote something that they were just passionate about, a passion project, something that made them laugh or cry or made them feel scared. And then those books are the ones that go massive. So don't try and write like someone else. Don't try and write a subject because it's hot. Write something that means something to you.
That's really come through in the discussion today, listening to you all, and kind of, hearing you talk about kind of bringing the kind of themes and experiences that are really important to all of you into your writing. The sort of depth and complexity and passion that comes through that, it comes with that, really comes through. So yeah, I think that's amazing advice. Thank you, Callie. Abby, how about you?
First, I want to say I'm so glad this wasn't at 11 o'clock my time, because I don't really stay up that late. But and I enjoyed this so much that I'm glad I'm here and fully woke. So that just worked out to be so well. So to be such a good thing. I always tell people, finish your story. So many people come to me and they go, I have like 7 stories, or I've been working on a story for 10 years. Write your story. It doesn't always come out the right way the first time, like Madeline said. You can go over and do a draft, redo the draft, but you can't make your story better if you haven't written the story. So I tell everybody, pick one of those 17 stories, or the one story that you're working on, and finish it. Get to the end, type the end, and then you can go back and do whatever you need to do. Because, as writers, that's what we do. We write. But if you want your story to get out there, or even if you want that satisfaction of writing the story, none of those things will happen if it's not a complete story. So just make sure you finish your project, stick to it. You can do it and get it done.
Amazing. Really important. Thank you, Abby. Tori, anything from you? Any advice for writers?
Well, I love what Madeline, Callie, and Abby just said. So, I'll start by echoing, write the book that fascinates you, because it could take years. You could be living with this book for years. And if it fascinates you, you're going to keep wanting to write it. If it doesn't fascinate you, if it bores you, what's it going to do to the reader? So do write to what is inspiring and, exciting you, rather than writing to a genre. But I will throw out something different. Short stories. Write some short stories if you don't already. Not in place of, but in addition to. Because when I was working on, and I've always thought of myself as a novelist, and as I was working on novels, a friend of mine encouraged me to write short stories and put it out there. Well, The Ninja Daughter was a short story. One that I just thought, I think I'll just enter this contest. The deadline is tomorrow. What the hell? And I wrote this stream of conscious short story. And as soon as I did, I went, oh, that's going to be a novel. But I was writing another novel. So I kept writing that other novel. And then somebody invited me into an anthology, and I wrote that short story. And I thought, that's interesting. Maybe I'll make that into a novel. But I was writing this other novel. And what happened was, a lot of these little short pieces inspired big pieces. So the Call Me Dumpling short story became The Ninja Daughter and the Lily Wong series. A screenplay I wrote became that huge epic Brazilian novel. A dystopian thriller that I wrote for an anthology is now getting shopped by my literary agent as a novel. So they inspire you, they give you ideas. They're a very small bite. So if, like Abby was saying, you are having a hard time finishing something as long and marathon-like as a novel, write a short story. And it might, I think it was it Callie who was saying she wrote a short story and then it turned into a novel, right? People were saying, this is so great. What happened from that? It does one other thing that's really great for a new author. It gets your name out there. It gives you something to talk about, something to promote, something to engage, and a reason to become connected with different writers' associations. So there you go.
Thank you, Tori. That's great advice. Thank you. Caleb, to come to you just to finish this off. Any pieces of advice from you for aspiring writers?
Yeah, I co-sign what everybody has already said. And I would say that for me, perseverance was the most important thing my formal training. I studied to be an actor. I worked in TV production, so writing, like storytelling, was always important to me, but I had no formal education. I had no knowledge of how to write a book until I actually sat down to do it. I know very few authors who publish their first ever manuscript. And for me, I mean, my debut was the 5th manuscript that I had actually shopped around to agents. It was the 12th full-length manuscript I had ever completed. There were a bunch that I just I finished and then trunked because I knew that they weren't ready. But you've got to be prepared to handle rejection. You've got to be prepared to learn as you go, because it's always a process. I look at the work that I'm putting out now, and it's better than the work that I put out 4 years ago when my debut came out. So yeah, it's all about sort of being able to adapt, being able to grow, just sort of, be kind to yourself, I guess, but stick with it, and know that you are going to fail, you are going to fall down, and that's part of the process. And getting up and dusting yourself off and moving forward is also part of the process.
Amazing. What a fantastic note to finish on. Thank you, Caleb. That's a really amazing advice to round the evening off there. Thank you all so much. So that's all from us. So thank you all so much for joining us. To the panel, thank you to everybody watching and for the questions. It's been a really fascinating, insightful, interesting discussion. I've really enjoyed it. So thank you all. If you're watching, be sure to check out the YA Thrillercon website, because there's more panels happening tomorrow, and there's also lots more information about panel members this evening, where you can get hold of their books and find out more about their work. So thank you so much, everybody. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.